How is everyone doing on this Saturday night, September 6th, 2025? You are in the strategy room with Dr. Joe Berquist, the banker next door. I thank everyone for joining me this evening. I've got 2 hours of action-packed excitement. Well, maybe not, but a lot of financial and banking news for everyone tonight. That's for sure. So we've got a lot of stuff here to kick off tonight. We got a lot of tariff news to talk about. Just a million things that seem to be happening in that whole conversation right now. We got more drama with the Fed, with Lisa Cook. We've also got a couple other things Fed-wise we're going to look at. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, wrote a monumental article that we're going to talk about. And I don't think it's an understatement to say that we may look back on this in a few years and say that this article is a historic article, but like I said, we'll get to that in just a few minutes. We're going to talk about the jobs report, jobs numbers. We're going to talk about some other economic indicators. I've got a ton of banking news for everybody here tonight, so we got a lot of stuff to get to. So we are going to kick off here as we usually do with our U.S. debt clock, and we're going to check in. So our national debt still cruising at $37 trillion. Our U.S. federal budget deficit still a little over $2 trillion. The Doge clock is now up to $623 billion with savings per taxpayer of $5,551. That is looking good. And the GDP, the debt to GDP ratio, still at 123%. So still extremely high. We would certainly love to see that number come down a little bit. Let's take a look so how are our bond numbers looking here for the week? So our 10-year Treasury notes still hovering in at 4.25%. I'm sorry, no, I shouldn't say that. It's actually at 4.077%. I stand corrected. So actually seen a little bit of drop from when we were here last week looking at some of these numbers. 30-year bond has increased up to 4.762%. And let's see here. And let's see. The 2-year note is still at 3.519. So we got almost about a 50 basis point spread between the 10-year and the 2-year note. Not too shabby, not too bad. And the notes below a year, 3.65, 6 month at 3.8, the 3 month at 4.012, and the 1 month at 4.165. So again, Treasury yields kind of hanging strong, hanging where we basically like to see them for the moment. So I am going to start off here today with everyone with this I saw, and it kind of touched a nerve. And I wanted to start off with this tonight because I was so shocked. I couldn't believe it. So this Hyundai factory down in Georgia got raided yesterday and had over 450 illegal immigrants working in this factory. And I just want to read, and this was a piece here that was on X and breaking. It has been revealed that the Hyundai battery plant raided in Georgia, being operated almost entirely by illegals, is the same facility built with $5 billion as part of a Biden administration investment to bring jobs back to America. And, it's just, this is just mind-blowing to see this, because on so many levels. You have Hyundai here, who took $5 billion from the U.S. government to build a factory in Georgia that was designed to employ U.S. workers. And at a time when, we're seeing this weakening jobs report and everybody's, well, what about wages for workers and decent jobs and everything else? And then you're sitting here and you go, oh, okay, this is why Americans aren't getting jobs, because these companies are busy giving all of these jobs to illegal immigrants. And it's just, it's just infuriating to see this. And I want to show you guys another article here. So this is from the Epoch Times, and this is 475 detained in immigration enforcement operation in Hyundai's Georgia megasite. The operation was the largest single site enforcement operation in the history of Homeland Security investigations. So work at Hyundai's Georgia complex that manufactures electric vehicles has been suspended after federal authorities detained hundreds of workers in a major immigration enforcement operation on Thursday, officials said. On September 4th, federal authorities entered a work site in Bryan County, Georgia, where South Korean manufacturing companies Hyundai Motor Corp and LG Energy Solutions are building a $4.3 billion battery cell manufacturing plant. Authorities from the Department of Homeland Security and the Justice Department said about 450 workers were detained. A number of South Korean nationals were detained. A spokesperson at Hyundai's battery joint venture partner, South Korean battery maker LG Energy Solutions, said construction had been paused and that it was cooperating with law enforcement. Yeah, no duh, right? In a September 5th statement, South Korea's foreign ministry said that many South Korean nationals were detained during the operation. The economic activities of our companies investing in the United States and the interests of our citizens must not be unduly violated during the course of U.S. law enforcement. Ministry spokesperson Lee Jae-woong said in a press briefing conducted near the site on September 4th, Stephen Schrank, the special agent in charge of Homeland Security investigations for Georgia, said the operation was judicially authorized as the agency is looking into unlawful employment practices at the construction site. In a follow-up briefing on September 5th, Schrank said that 475 people were arrested, of whom a majority were South Korean nationals. So far, he said no charges have been filed. Schrank called the operation the largest single-site enforcement operation in the history of Homeland Security investigations. The plant is being built by HLGA Battery Company, a joint venture between Hyundai and LG Energy Solutions at Hyundai's existing electric vehicle assembly Meta plant near Savannah, Georgia. The battery plant is expected to produce batteries for Hyundai, Kia, and Genesis electric vehicles. It is part of Hyundai's broader $12.6 billion investment in Georgia. In March, leaders of Hyundai and Kia joined local dignitaries, including Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, to celebrate the opening of the Hyundai Motor Group Meta Plant America in Elabella, Georgia. They called the cumulative effort the largest economic development project in Georgia's history. The immigration enforcement operation is part of a broader push by the Trump administration to crack down on the employment of illegal immigrants. Now, you may be asking yourself a couple of questions here. You may be asking yourself, how is it that there are 450 plus illegal immigrants working on the construction of this factory there in Georgia? You may ask yourself, doesn't Georgia have a labor department? And if you ask that question, you may be right, because here it is. Here is the Georgia Department of Labor right here. Now, so we have established that they do have a Department of Labor. So how on earth did all of these individuals get hired and put on the job site here, and nobody here at the Department of Labor seems to know anything about it? Now we might ask ourselves, since we know that the Georgia Department of Labor is not a fictitious organization, it does exist. It's not, unlike the Wizard of Oz, it does exist. And you may ask yourself, well, who is in charge of said Georgia Department of Labor? Oh, and here you have right here, I give you Barbara Rivera Holmes. Barbara Rivera Holmes was sworn in as the 11th commissioner of the Georgia Department of Labor and the state's first Latina constitutional officer on April 4th, 2025 by Georgia Governor Brian Kemp. The Georgia Department of Labor is pivotal to the state's economic health, providing essential services such as unemployment insurance, job placement, and workforce development programs. These services are vital for supporting individuals and businesses, ensuring that Georgia's labor market remains robust and competitive, and that Georgia remains the #1 state for illegal immigrant employment. I'm sorry, I added that last part in there. Yeah, I would suggest that maybe a few people give Miss Rivera Holmes a phone call and basically say, what's going on there? What's going on in Georgia? How did you allow this to happen? And I think this gets to a much broader, this whole thing gets to a much broader context, that the reality of a lot of things is starting to hit home in our economy in terms of, and we'll get into the job numbers here in just a minute, but when you start looking at this, you want a big part of the problems of so many aspects of our lives. When you look at the health insurance industry, when you look at the housing industry, you look at employment, it so much has been in fact impacted because of the fact that we have let tens of millions of illegal immigrants flood into this country in the last 4 years. The illegal immigrants, I believe, my 2 cents, I believe they are helping to bankrupt our health insurance industry. I believe that they have caused a big part of the housing crisis. I believe that they have been a big part of driving prices on all kinds of things up. More people in here, more mouths, higher demand. It's supply and demand. How many other places like this around here? Like we saw, there were stories a few weeks ago of construction sites down in Florida that got raided because, again, same deal, hundreds of illegal immigrants working on these sites. And I would say here that, when you have a situation this egregious, this does not happen by accident. You don't, by accident is maybe you get 3 or 4 people on the job site that, maybe, shouldn't be there or kind of worm their way in or something like that. 450 people? No, 450 people is a plan. That is a plan to get people in there to exploit cheap labor. And this gets to an even deeper conversation, because I believe both sides of the political aisle are at fault for this. And you may ask, well, why is that? Well, I think that the Democrats, on the one hand, they want to flood our country with illegal immigrants because they are hoping to convert those illegals into voters and then create thus a one-party basic political system, give them ultimate power. That's their end game. But on the Republican side, you have all these you have all these owners of large corporations that, they decry what's going on, but at the same time, they want the cheap labor and they're addicted to the cheap labor. And that's why when Trump got into the White House, they are all these donors were running in going, hey, listen, we're cool with you shutting down the border. We've kind of got our fill of illegal immigrants, so we're good. Okay, you could shut it down. Just don't get rid of the people that are already here because, we like that cheap labor. We want that cheap labor. And, so this whole mess is a giant problem on both sides of the political aisle. And they both have their reasons for what they're trying to do here. And in the middle is the American people who are getting totally shafted by all this. So I think the moral of the story here is, if you want these good paying jobs, if you want your health insurance not to implode, if you want the value of houses to come back down, if you want to have the correct amount of housing available to you to buy, guess who needs to go? Guess who needs to go? I'll give you one guess. I think you can figure it out. There's a certain group of people that need to go. They need to go back home, go back to wherever they came from. And again, I know there's a lot of people out there that don't want to hear that, but it has become an economic reality. And I see things like this, and it disgusts me. It really, really disgusts me. And like I said, I hope a few people will make some phone calls over to the Georgia Department of Labor and make a couple phone calls over to Barbara Rivera Holmes and basically try to find out what in the world is going on down there in Georgia. So, all right, that's my soapbox for that. But I'm just getting warmed up here tonight. All right. Now I want to talk about this monumental article that just came out yesterday. Now, this is an article that's in the Wall Street Journal, and this is just an op-ed piece that was in there, and this is called "The Fed's Gain of Function Monetary Policy." This is written by Scott Bessent, the head of the Secretary of the Treasury. Thank you. Now, this article here in the Wall Street Journal, this opinion piece, is just based on the overall much larger article, which is right here. And this article was written in the International Economy was the journal that this was written in. It was basically the same name, the Fed's New Gain of Function Monetary Policy, overuse of non-standard policies, mission creep, and institutional bloat are threatening the central bank's monetary independence. Now, let me just give you guys because we don't have time to go through this whole thing here. It's not a super long, it's like 16 pages, but we're not going to go through all that. I thought it would be better just to give everybody an overview here of what we're looking at. So the paper is highly critical of the Federal Reserve's policies since the 2008 financial crisis. Sounds great. Love it. The key arguments of Besant's papers falls on 5 main things. We have controversial comparison, loss of independence, widening inequality, distorted market, and then finally a call for reform. So, controversial comparison. Besant equates the Fed's extraordinary monetary policy tools with gain-of-function biology research, arguing they have unleashed harmful, unpredictable consequences on the real world. 100%. He hit the nail right on the head. Loss of independence. He claims that the Fed's expanded use of monetary tools and mission creep threaten its independence. He argues that this independence is fundamental to the U.S. economic success. This I disagree with. I would say it like this. I think the Fed's independence, which I think is a fallacy, I think it has always been a fallacy. Whenever they don't want people snooping around, whenever they start to hear the word audit, oh, we want an audit of the Fed, they always, and whenever the Fed starts to come under any kind of criticism for anything, they always run back to their whole independent. Independence is like their shield. Oh, well, we need to be independent. We need to be independent. Don't bother us. Don't be a bully. We're independent over here. Yeah, they're not independent. They've never been independent. That's a fallacy. But what I would say here is the Fed itself is jeopardizing their illusion of independence. They are doing it to themselves. Okay, because by doing all the crazy things that they've done, and then when people start to ask legitimate questions, and then they start, immediately with throwing up the independence shield, that's only going to make people push back more. That's only going to make people come after them harder. That is only going, and then when you have things like a Fed governor committing mortgage fraud, and then the president fires her, and then she refuses to leave, and then the chairman of the Fed doesn't do anything about it, that is called the Fed shooting themselves in the foot. That is called self-inflicted wounds on the Fed, and that is the Fed creating their own jeopardy of creating jeopardy to their own fallacy of independence. So that's how I would say it more like that. Widening inequality. Besant states that the Fed's policies, particularly large-scale asset purchases, created a de facto backstop for asset owners. He contends this has concentrated wealth and exacerbated class and generational disparities, with less affluent households disproportionately hurt by inflation. Bingo! Bingo! 150%. Now, let me just read that one more time for everybody. Besant states that the Fed's policies, particularly large-scale asset purchases, created a de facto backstop for asset owners. Now, what does he mean by asset owners? He means for people that own assets. You own houses. You own stock. So in other words, the inflation. Remember, inflation has 2 sides to it. You have asset side, meaning any assets you own get inflated, and then you have price inflation. In other words, the prices for goods at the store or prices for services, things like that. So the Fed's mantra since Greenspan in the early 1990s has been asset inflation is totally cool. They love asset inflation. They just don't like price inflation, because price inflation has a tendency to get the masses angry, and then the masses have a tendency to turn on the politicians in office, and politicians don't like that. So, but they do love people. They do love, donors and everything who own big houses and a whole lot of stock. They love them getting rich. So asset inflation's cool, price inflation bad. But what Besant's saying is that the Fed has gone out of their way to create this de facto backstop for these people that own major assets. And he contends this has concentrated wealth and exacerbated class and generational disparities, with less affluent households disproportionately hurt by inflation. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Do you know who did the best during the pandemic? The billionaire class. Yes, the billionaire class made more money during COVID than at any other time in the history of this country. The top 1%, they COVID was big business for them. They made out handsomely during COVID. And that's what Besant is talking about here. Distorted market. He writes that the Fed's adoption of quantitative easing and other non-standard policies has created severe market distortions. Yes, 100%. This has benefited large firms that can secure cheap debt while squeezing smaller firms reliant on variable rate loans. Again, bingo, 100%. If you, again, I'll say this, if you've got to look at the Lords of Easy Money series that I have done, you have to go read the book, The Lords of Easy Money. If you read that book, you will understand all of this stuff. You will understand exactly what's going on. You will understand how badly the Fed has distorted our markets and why it is so painful going back to like I would contend right now, we just have normal interest rates. But the fact is that the not only the monetary damage, but the psychological damage that they have done to people is immense. It is enormous. And you can't discount that. You have to go, like I said, watch my Lords of Easy Money series. Look at the interviews that I have in there with Dr. Thomas Honig. Go in there, watch those episodes, learn about what the Fed is doing. You will know and understand all of this stuff. And then finally at the end, and this might be the most important thing, the call for reform. Besson urges the Fed to change course and calls for an independent review of the entire institution, including its policy, regulation, and communications. He recommends the central bank shed responsibilities like bank supervision and focus on its core mandate. Boom! Boom! There is the mic drop right there. So, and this is what I mean by when I said a few minutes ago why this article here may prove to be historic. I mean, here you have, I want you to think about this in a larger context. Here you have the Treasury Secretary of the United States basically calling the Fed on the carpet for everything that they have done over the last 16, 17 years. And now, and basically pointing it all out. You have created widening inequality. You yourself are killing your independence with your horrible actions. He talks about the distortion of the market. And then at the end, he wraps up with this call to urges the Fed to change course and calls for an independent review of the entire institution, including its policy, its regulation, and its communications. He recommends the central bank shed responsibilities like bank supervision and focus on its core mandate. I mean, this is major happening here. Scott Besson is basically what he's signaling to you is that he's calling for an independent review of the Fed, and that basically they want to majorly alter the Federal Reserve Bank. That is basically what he is signaling to you here. They want to majorly alter the Federal Reserve Bank. And this is it's amazing. But let's go back to this little piece here, right? So we kind of get into this. And I can't read this whole thing. We got way too much news and stuff to get into here. But I just want to point out that he says here. So as we saw during the COVID pandemic, lab-created experiments can wreak havoc when they escape their confines. Once released, they can't easily be put back. The extraordinary monetary policy tools unleashed after the 2008 financial crisis have similarly transformed the Federal Reserve's policy regime with unpredictable consequences. The Fed's new operating model is effectively a gain-of-function monetary policy experiment. Overuse of non-standard policies, mission creep, and institutional bloat threaten the central bank's independence. The Fed must change course. Its standard toolkit has become too complex to manage, with uncertain theoretical underpinnings. Simple and measurable tools aimed at a narrow mandate are the clearest way to deliver better outcomes and safeguard central bank independence over time. One might think the new tools created after 2008 and the centralization of the financial market would have given the Fed greater insight about the economy's direction. At a minimum, all those gained functions should have allowed the Fed to steer the economy more effectively. That didn't happen. In 2009, the Fed forecast that real gross domestic product would accelerate to 4% in 2011. Instead, growth slowed to 1.6%. Cumulatively over that period, the Fed's two-year projections overstated real GDP by more than $1 trillion. Repeated misses demonstrate that the Fed placed too much faith in its own abilities and in expansionary fiscal policy to spur growth. When the Trump administration shifted toward tax cuts and deregulation, the Fed's forecasts were too pessimistic, underscoring its reliance on flawed models and neglect of supply-side effects. Successive interventions during and after the financial crisis of 2008 created what it amounted to a de facto backstop for asset owners. This harmful cycle concentrated national wealth among those who already owned assets. Within the corporate sector, large firms thrived by locking in cheap debt, while smaller firms reliant on floating rate loans were squeezed as rates rose. Homeowners saw their property values soar, largely insulated by fixed rate mortgages. Meanwhile, younger and less affluent households shut out of ownership and hit hardest by inflation missed out on appreciation. By failing to deliver on its inflation mandate, the Fed allowed class and generational disparities to widen. Its pursuit of a wealth effect to stimulate growth backfired. Unprecedented inequality is clear proof that the wealth effect is all too effective for the wealthy, but an accelerant to economic hardship for everyone else. Financial analyst Karen Petru wrote in her book Engine of Inequality in 2021. The Fed's growing footprint has profound implications for independence. By extending its remit into areas traditionally reserved for fiscal authorities, the Fed has blurred the lines between monetary and fiscal policy. The central bank's balance sheet policies directly influence which sectors receive capital, intervening in what should be the domain of markets and elected officials. Entanglement with Treasury debt management creates the perception that monetary policy is being used to accommodate fiscal needs. Expanded powers have fostered a culture in Washington that relies on the Fed to bail out the government after poor fiscal choices. Instead of accountability, presidents and Congress have expected intervention when their policies falter. This only game in town dynamic has created perverse incentives for irresponsibility. Yes, he's just killing it. I wish I had time to read the rest of this to everybody. But yes, Scott Bessent is absolutely killing it in this article. I suggest that everybody go read this article, go check it out, go look. And like I said, you could find this paper with just a simple Google search. The Fed's Gain of Function Monetary Policy by Scott Bessent, written in the magazine The International Economy. So I highly recommend everybody go check this out. And I cannot tell you, I guarantee you, this is in Washington, D.C. at the Fed. This is major conversation topic tonight. I guarantee you there are a lot of people this weekend reading this article, reading that piece of the Wall Street Journal, and they are freaking out because they know the writing's on the wall and they know what's coming. One of the most interesting things, I think one of the most interesting chapters in the book, The Lords of Easy Money, is at some point I think it was in 2019, when the whole was called the basis point trade with the hedge funds was about to basically blew up the repo market. But the Fed was basically able to make a big, like 380 something billion injection into the repo market. It basically bailed out all the hedge funds. And then, of course, 2 months later, COVID hit, and then everybody forgot all about it. And it never, that story never came out. But what was interesting was some of the internal conversations at the Fed. And Christopher Leonard talks about this in his book. And it basically goes like this. Some of the people in the Fed were terrified. They were terrified. And they were sitting there going, man, when this all comes out, what we did here, how we basically allowed the hedge funds, the big Wall Street hedge funds to go all get, because we were asleep at the wheel, we allowed the Wall Street hedge funds to come in and basically take control of the repo market. And then when we went to increase interest rates, we basically blew up this basis trade. And then we had to go in and bail them out. And when people find all this out, they may take our independence away from us. They may come in here and they were scared to death that people were going to find out about what they did and ultimately what the ramifications of that was going to be. And I always like that was always one of the big things in the book that stuck out at me. The fact that you have to remember sometimes that the people that work in these organizations, the people that work for the Fed, these people are human beings, and they read this stuff just like we all do. They're all reading this stuff just like we do, and they have reactions just like we do in terms of, they feel the fear, they feel the pressure, they feel the heat. And that's why I said, I guarantee you there are a bunch of people at the Fed reading this, okay, going, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. So this is, like I said, this is monumental. Go read it. Go check it out. I would save this one. This is one of those few articles that I would tell you to save, because I have a feeling in the next couple of years, we're going to be looking back on this as this might be the moment. This might be the moment that this call was this was the little snowball that began rolling downhill and maybe turned into a giant snowball. It maybe turned into an avalanche that fell on top of the Federal Reserve Bank. But we shall see. And then I will share this article with you on this same topic. So because I saw this and I was like, oh, this fits in very nicely. Central banks do not prevent financial crises or control inflation. Central banks have become the dominant force in financial markets. And this goes right into what Scott Bessent was saying. Central banks have become the dominating force in financial markets. Easing and tightening decisions move all assets from bonds to private equity. Their role is supposed to be to control inflation, provide price stability, and ensure normal market functions. However, there is little evidence of any success in achieving their goals. The era of central bank dominance has been characterized by boom and bust cycles, financial crises, policy incentives to increase government spending and debt, and persistent inflation. Recently developed economies, central banks have taken an increasingly interventionist role. The creation and proliferation of central banks over the past century promised greater financial stability. However, as history and current events continually show, central banks have not prevented financial crises. The frequency and severity of these crises have fluctuated but have not declined since central banks became the leading figure in financial market regulation and monetary interventions. Instead, central banking has introduced new fragilities and changed the nature, but not the recurrence, of financial turmoil. Empirical evidence dispels the myth that central banks ended the era of frequent financial crises. Regardless of central bank oversight, a credit boom preceded 1 in 3 banking crises. Who created those credit booms? Central banks, through the manipulation of interest rates. According to Levin and Valencia's comprehensive database, there were 147 banking crises between 1970 and 2011 alone. In an era of near universal central bank dominance, financial crises remain a persistent global phenomenon, occurring in cycles that coincide with episodes of credit expansion. Central banks have often prolonged boom periods with low rates and elevated asset purchases, and created abrupt bursts moments after making mistakes about inflation and credit risks. I could go on. Central banks act as lenders of last resort and regulators. However, with each subsequent crisis, the solution is always the same: larger and more aggressive asset purchase programs and negative real rates. This means that central banks have gradually moved from lender of last resort to lenders of first resort, a role that has amplified vulnerabilities. Because of the globalization of modern central banking and financial innovations, crises tend to be larger in scale and more complex, affecting most nations. The profound involvement of central banks in markets means their policies, such as emergency liquidity or asset purchases, mask systemic risks, leading to delayed but more dramatic failures. And then it goes into, the growing priority, supporting government over managing inflation. And then I'll just read these last 2 paragraphs here for you. So, modern central banking has shown that no single authority should set interest rates and liquidity. They have constantly erred on the side of rising government size in the economy and made erroneous estimates of inflation and job growth. The reason for this is straightforward. As the role of government in the economy and sovereign debt, which is often considered the safest assets, increase, the central bank's role becomes increasingly important for maintaining market stability. Many central banks state that they don't interfere with fiscal policy and remain independent, except when someone dares to cut rates and political spending. As such, dares to cut taxes and political spending. As such, central banks are not a limit to risk taking, rising government spending, and budget irresponsibility, but rather a tool that enables market and government excess. Yes, I mean, I think this gentleman here in this article, Daniel LaCalle, I think the gentleman here in this article, I think he hits the nail right on the head. You know, central banks do not prevent financial crises or control inflation. Again, there is, there's a lot of the central bank that is a mirage, if you will. Again, they get up there and they act as, masters of the universe, and we control all things and we can do all things. But again, this gets back to the track record, right? The track record of the Fed. What has the track record? The track record, when you look at it, has been an abysmal failure. But the problem is, it's the way that the Fed gets reported on. The Fed, they create these boom and bust cycles, right? And like I said, the Fed is the arsonist who shows up at your house with the fire truck, and then the financial media always heralds them as the hero. Like, oh, look, the Fed tossed a hand grenade into our house and blew it up. But wait, they just showed up with the fire truck to put the fire out. Oh, they're the best. We love these guys, and you just kind of sit there puzzled, scratching your head, like what is going on? And the problem is timing. The problem is always timing. When the Fed does stuff, it doesn't happen overnight. It happens over the course of many years, and it takes years for this stuff to play out. And by the time it does play out, and by the time things blow up, and then the Fed comes in to intervene on our behalf, when that happens, people forget about all of the seeds and all of the harvesting and all the things that happened for years beforehand. They forget about all that because everybody's got a 5-second attention span. And this is part of what makes understanding a lot of this stuff difficult, because you have to go back, you have to read and study about the Fed for a year. You got to go back and look at over 100 years of history on the Fed in this country just to understand a lot of what's going on with these ups and downs, and why, when I say that their record of preventing stuff is abysmal, it's abysmal. And again, that's what I thought that this article did a great job of pointing out, and I thought that this dovetailed really nicely with Scott Besson's article there. So I think that the timing might be right to start asking some very serious questions of, what has the Fed been doing? Has what they've been doing been working? Are there problems at the Federal Reserve? Are there cultural problems? Like, why do they keep missing the mark? I think we need to start asking some very tough questions of the Federal Reserve, and I think it's time for them to start answering. And I don't mean Jeremy Powell getting in front of Congress and giving some ridiculous testimony where he just dodges and ducks and dives and then rolls out of town. No, I mean like an independent review where you have some independent auditors go in there and they depose Powell and a lot of the Fed governors and a whole bunch of people over there at the Fed, and basically say, hey, what's going on here? And then grill them, and then they can do it behind closed doors, whatever, but grill them. And then let's see the report. Let's see the report of what they come back with. Let's see what that really says. And then maybe we could go from there and figure out what to do. But we may be, the winds of change may be upon us, and again, I'm not saying get rid of the Federal Reserve, because I don't know that you can do that. And there's a lot of reasons why. because the one thing you have to get, and I'm just gonna, again, I don't mean to get all crazy off the soapbox here on this thing, but the one thing I just want to point out to people, all the people that are like, end the Fed, get rid of the Federal Reserve, whatever, we did it twice. We had two central banks at the beginning of the country, and we got rid of them, and then the Fed was created in 1913. So yes, a lot of that is all true. But what you have to understand is that when we had those two central banks at the beginning of the country, when we had the first Bank of the United States and the second Bank of the United States, they were nothing like what a central bank is today. They were nowhere near as large, as complex. And the other thing you have to understand too is that the dollar was not the reserve currency of the world back then. The U.S. dollar was a fledgling dollar. We had the Continental and everything back then. It was a different time. You got to remember the greenback did not get introduced until Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War. So there's just a lot has changed since those times. And America is the biggest economy in the world. The Federal Reserve is the most powerful central bank in the world, and everybody looks to them for better or for worse for guidance. And we've got the dollar as the reserve currency of the world. So as much as I might want to sit there, or a lot of other people might want to sit there and say, hey, let's just get rid of the Fed altogether. We don't need the Fed. We could do it other ways, whatever. I don't know that that's necessarily true. And I prefer my approach. I would prefer just to see major changes at the Fed. I would like to see the Fed, neutered in a certain respect. I would like to see, that Federal Reserve Act open backed up. And I'd like to see a full review. And I would like to see a lot of things change. Like, first of all, if the Fed wants to stay independent, I don't know. I really want a so-called independent Fed. And I've never believed in that argument. I think that argument is all hogwash. And, if the Fed's so independent, they don't need my tax monies to build their Taj Mahal headquarters over there. Now, do they? No, they could pay for that themselves. Since they're so independent, right? They don't need my tax dollars to build their Taj Mahal building. They could spend $2.5 billion. Jeremy Powell could take that out of his salary, okay, to go build that building. So stick that in your craw and chew on that for a while. But again, are changes warranted? Yes, absolutely. And will those changes come? Maybe we'll see. We'll see what happens here. But all right. Let's move on to some other things here. So this I thought was really interesting this week. So Trump considering housing emergency declaration this fall. Again, from Scott Bessent. I think everything is on the table, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said in a Labor Day interview. So President Trump is thinking about declaring a national housing emergency in the fall. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said in a Labor Day interview with the Washington Examiner. Bessent stated that the administration is considering a list of measures to bolster supply and cut housing costs, including possible tariff exemptions on construction materials. The administration is also studying tactics to standardize local building and zoning codes. The finance head said, we're trying to figure out what we can do, and we don't want to step into the business of states, counties, and municipal governments. He said on September 1st, I think everything is on the table. Bessent said that if the Federal Reserve cuts interest rates this year, it could improve housing affordability. Investors overwhelmingly expect the Fed to lower the federal funds rate, a key policy rate that affects business, consumer, and government borrowing costs later this month. Mortgage rates typically track the 10-year Treasury yield, which is partially influenced by the Fed funds rate. Bessent acknowledged that the administration can employ policy to ensure that more families can purchase a residential property. We may declare a national housing emergency in the fall, he said. So far this year, the president has declared several national emergencies, including those related to the border security and economic threats. And then they go on to talk about kind of the housing market a little bit there, or whatever. But very interesting. Potential, housing emergency declaration. I mean, I think this would be very interesting. We'll have to see what becomes of that, but definitely something to keep an eye on here. So, okay, more drama here with Fed Governor Lisa Cooks. Obviously, I had probably a little bit too much fun with this last week with just the amount of drama here. But this continued into this week. So Fed's Cook defends mortgage details. Lawyers argue the government was aware before the central bank official was nominated of the inconsistencies that prompted President Donald Trump to fire her. Like, okay, so they were aware. So they didn't. And what do they mean by the government was aware? Wasn't she hired by the Federal Reserve? That's kind of weird. But they were aware that of these inconsistencies. Not that I love you got to love how they say this. It's not the mortgage fraud. So they were apparently aware of the mortgage fraud, not the inconsistencies, but the mortgage fraud. Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook did not ever commit mortgage fraud. Her lawyer, Abel Lowe, wrote Tuesday in a court filing. The defense comes days after lawyers for President Donald Trump asserted that Cook offered no defense to the charges, not in public or in private. Trump dismissed Cook last week, citing a criminal referral Federal Housing Finance Agency Director Bill Pulte submitted to the Justice Department last month. Cook then sued Trump to halt the firing. Pulte alleges Cook may have committed mortgage fraud because she obtained mortgages for properties in Georgia and Michigan, but listed each as a principal residence. Pulte, in a second referral, also flagged a third residence of Cook's in Massachusetts. So, so Lisa Cook apparently owns property all over the country in Georgia, Michigan, Massachusetts. She owns all these properties in all these different states that she's renting out. And but hey, it's all good. It's because they're just inconsistencies. So it's all good. In a questionnaire previously submitted to the government, Cook listed the Michigan address as her primary residence and the Georgia address as her second home. Lowell noted in Tuesday's filing. In a second questionnaire that Cook submitted, the Georgia address listed as her present residence, while the Michigan home is her present and current permanent residence, the filing shows. The Massachusetts home, meanwhile, is listed as Cook's present residence, as well as a second home and rental property, according to the filing. Further, Lowell argued government entities received those mortgage details before the Senate confirmed Cook's nomination to the Fed in May of 2022. And that information was disclosed to the White House before former President Joe Biden nominated her. So what does that matter? Okay, all that says is that she never should have been there in the first place, because they should have caught this at the beginning, and then they shouldn't have confirmed her. That's all that means. That doesn't clear her of anything here, because the previous administration was a bunch of morons, and because the Senate, the slime bags in the Senate confirmed her, so that just makes everything okay. All right, and then let's go higher. So Fed Governor Lisa Cook did not ever commit mortgage fraud, her lawyer says, as we established here. Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook did not ever commit mortgage fraud, her attorney wrote. The lawyer, Abe Howell, asked a judge to temporarily block President Donald Trump from firing her from the central bank's board. Nearly 600 economists signed an open letter backing Cook and defending the Fed's independence. Now, I loved what Bill Pulte said about this. So he said nearly 600 economists are okay with mortgage fraud. I love it. Oh my gosh, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, this definitely falls into the realm of you can't make this stuff up. And then we have here, and then of course CNBC trying to be slick here. Pulte refuses to say where he got Lisa Cook mortgage fraud tip. A lot of it's public information. Bill Pulte, President Donald Trump's housing finance chief, repeatedly declined to offer any details about where he got the tip that led to accused Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook of mortgage fraud. I'm not going to explain our sources and methods, where we get tips from, who are whistleblowers, Pulte said on Squawk Box. Trump moved to fire Cook in response to Pulte's allegations, which are currently under investigation by the Justice Department. They tried to press him to release the sources or whatever, but that's not that, he doesn't have to do that. I'm sure he turned that stuff over to the Justice Department, and then it becomes the Justice Department job. It becomes their job to hear the evidence and then make a decision, make a ruling on said evidence. Okay. But here's the thing. Again, most of this information is public information. We can all go look this up. She's a public employee. she has to make these disclosures. She has to put them out there. Now, what I've said is her tax returns are not public. I think her tax returns could, either clear a lot of this up or could further bury her. I think, and I seriously doubt she's going to release her tax returns, because I think that would be the final nail in the coffin. Because I think you'd see her tax returns and she, would probably be showing a whole lot of rental income for all these properties. So, but again, I mean, this stuff it continues to just go back and forth. And obviously we're still waiting for the judge to rule. The judge looked at this last Friday and then kind of punted in a way, basically didn't render a final decision of any kind on it. And now, so we're still left. And like I said, now we've just had these things going back and forth. But again, this is just, I mean, again, this is an easy one. Jeremy Powell, as the head of the Federal Reserve, he just goes back and basically says, you know what, Lisa, I love you, but this is this may go your way, it may not. And there's probably a good chance, based on what's out there, given the fact that a lot of this, again, is just public information, that you're probably not going to go there. And yet again, you've already had the Washington Post and CNN and a whole bunch of other people have already basically said, yeah, we looked at the information and she looks pretty guilty. So again, I just don't think that this is going to go her way. And the longer, Jeremy Powell is on his, I'm going to resist, I'm resisting. As long as he wants to go down that road, he's just going to continue to shoot himself in the foot. And he's going to give, Scott Bessent, and that monumental article that he wrote, he's just giving, they're destroying their own notion of independence by doing this. He could save all that if he truly cared about all that and wanted to save it as he sees it. Then he would go back to Lisa and he would say, Lisa, listen, love you, but you got to go. Okay. You messed up. You did these things. You got to go, because I have to save the institution. I got to preserve this fallacy of independence at the Fed. Okay. And if you don't go, and if I have to continue to sit here and, resist the president and resist the administration, he's digging his own grave. He's digging the grave for the Fed. But and like I said, hey, keep doing it. Keep doing it, Jeremy. Keep doing it. You're doing a bang up job, man. Just keep rolling with it. So, and then here's another interesting piece that came up. So Trump asks Supreme Court to let him fire FTC Commissioner Rebecca Slaughter. President Donald Trump asked Supreme Court to allow him to fire Federal Trade Commission Commissioner Rebecca Slaughter, who had been reinstated to that post after he had terminated her. Trump in March removed two Democratic commissioners from their post at the FTC, Slaughter and Alvaro Bedoya, as part of his sprawling effort to exert his influence over federal agencies. And I love how you have to love how they say that. It's not his right as the president to appoint people that he wants to do. It's him exerting his influence over the federal agencies. No, he's the president. He's the commander in chief. I know you don't like him, but that's his right to put in the people that he wants to put in there. Just as if if another Democrat were to come into the office, they would immediately want that Democrat to fire all the Republicans and put Democrats in charge. Okay, that's how it's just a game. That's how the game works. But again, exert his influence over the federal agencies. The question of cause for termination is also at the crux of Trump's bid to remove Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook from her role. Yes. So we'll see what happens with this one as well. So, all right, let's talk about some payroll numbers for a few minutes, shall we? So here was the jobs report for August, and it wasn't pretty. It wasn't a pretty August report. So payrolls rose only 22,000 in August, less than expected, in a further sign of a hiring slowdown. So non-farm payrolls increased by just 22,000 for the month, lower than the 75,000 forecast, while the unemployment rate rose to 4.3%. The report showed a marked slowdown from the July increase of 79,000, which was revised up. We actually had an upward revision, if you could believe that, to by 6,000 jobs. Revisions also show a net loss of 13,000 in June. Healthcare again led by sectors, adding 31,000 jobs, while social assistance contributed 16,000. Wholesale trade and manufacturing both saw declines of 12,000 on the month. So let's see here. Now we could see here from this chart. The U.S. economy actually lost some 13,000 jobs in June, according to the revised data here. So we can see here negative 13,000. 79,000 increase in July and 22,000 in August. Now, we're going to see here in a minute when we talk about what the Fed is going to do with interest rate cuts here in a couple weeks. And I think the sentiment is that, based on this jobs report, that they're going to be cutting the rate, no doubt. And you can see here, 19,000 in May. Last 4 months here have not been very good at all. We had 158 in April. Employment's kind of going on, but here is the other thing, and I'm gonna show this to you guys here in just a second, because I'm gonna show this to you. Come back to it, okay? Nearly 1 million jobs are about to vanish from the books, okay? And this is another revision of about 1 million jobs that are going to go away for jobs that were reported last year that did not exist, never existed, okay? This is almost basically, after this revision is made, we're going to get back to a point where there are almost 2 million jobs that were reported as being there last year were not real. Almost 2 million jobs. I mean, this is unbelievable. So again, part of what is happening here is that you are just starting to actually get real. I would say more. I wouldn't say real yet, but I would say more realistic job numbers is how I would describe it. And now you're starting to realize that a lot of those job numbers from last year were just complete BS. All these job numbers that we see here. 482,000 in January and 287 in, again, all these months. And I kept saying it the last couple of years, 2022 and 23 and 24, every month I read the Wall Street Journal every day. I read the Wall Street Journal, and I'm looking at the Wall Street Journal for years, and every day, front page, this company cuts 20,000 employees. This company cuts 5,000 employees. This company cuts 2,000 employees. This company cuts 500 employees. This company cuts 19,000 employees. So just job cuts galore all over the place. And I'm sitting there going, oh, okay, well, this isn't going to be a good jobs report this month. Oh, wait, boom. Wait a minute, what's that? We created 325,000 jobs. How in the world was that possible? How was that possible? And that was the first thing that really gave me an inclination that these job numbers are completely BS. And, and again, and one of the things I said at the beginning of the year is that I hope we finally start getting some real job numbers and some real, start getting some real data around some of these things. And the irony is, the people that have been questioning the jobs data for the last umpteen years, have been saying like, oh, okay, yeah, here's what's going on. Here's what's happening. We could see the manipulation out there. And then when Trump fires the head of the BLS, which, she was in there for 6 months longer than she should have been, because she should have been fired on January 20th. And then all of a sudden they're concerned with, the government numbers, we're concerned with how things are going over here, how these numbers are going to be calculated and blah, blah, blah. Had no concern over the last, umpteen years, had no concern of the fact of almost 2 million jobs were just completely bogus. They have no talk of this, none, zero. It's just outstanding. But anyway, all right. So let's take you back here. So the job market is stalling short of the runway, said Daniel Zeff, Zhao, chief economist at job site Glassdoor. Didn't they go bankrupt? I thought maybe I'm thinking of Monster. I think Monster went bankrupt, but Glassdoor shouldn't be too far behind. the labor market is losing lift, and August report, along with downward revisions, suggests we're heading into a turbulence without the soft landing achieved. Well, maybe not. And then they, of course, they want to show wage growth in there. Unemployment rate. All right. So they didn't have it. One thing that I just want to point out to people, when you look at these job numbers and when you dig into them, the one thing I want you to realize is that part of the reason that these jobs are down is because a lot of this is for government employees that are being laid off. It's not like, how do I want to say this? It's not big box retailers. It's not, mom and pop stores or whatever. Like, none of these other regular companies in the economy, they may not be hiring like gangbusters or hiring a ton of people, but they're not laying a whole ton of people off either. A big chunk of the people that you're seeing laid off here are government employees, which again, we knew was going to happen. We knew was going to come eventually. And that's a part of what you've been seeing these last 4 months. So when they start to paint a picture of like, oh, well, the economy is in shambles or the labor market's in shambles. Well, yes and no. It depends on a number of different factors. But let's continue on here for a second. So jobs report will get more accurate, Lutnick predicts, before the BLS reveals sluggish August hiring. So Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick predicted the Bureau of Labor Statistics job reports will be more accurate as a result of President Donald Trump firing Commissioner Erica McEntafar. This is a weird name. That prediction came less than an hour before the latest BLS report showed job growth stalled out in August. Trump had fired McEntafar last month, hours after her agency reported that U.S. job growth had significantly slowed in July. Lutnick said on CNBC Squawk Box that he believes the numbers will be more accurate because you'll take out the people who are just trying to create noise against the president. Well, yes and no. I mean, I think that I believe what he's saying there is that, I believe what he's saying there in terms of the numbers are hopefully going to be better and are going to be more accurate and more reliable. And again, taking out some people that want to create noise against the president, but that's not really what I care. I just want the numbers to be accurate. I just want the numbers to be real, because so many decisions and so many things are we have all these economic indicators for a reason. And those economic indicators are there to try to paint a picture of what's going on with the overall economy. And as business owners, as business operators, trying to drive commerce in the country, you have to use these economic indicators to try to make decisions, to try to make business decisions about what you're going to do. Are you going to enact a new line of business? Are you going to open another facility? Are you going to manufacture more product? Are you going to hire more employees? You do all that stuff based on a lot of the outlook from these economic indicators. And if these economic indicators are bogus and you can't believe them, and they've been putting out a lot of BS information, which is what I've seen over the last 3-4 years, it gets very difficult to make a lot of those decisions. So again, I just want there to be, just somebody who, truly is not playing politics, just in there and just giving us real numbers, whatever they may be, but just give us the real numbers and not a bunch of fluff. So, okay. And then another article here, disappointing jobs report expected to revise up, White House advisor Hassett says. So White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett called the new jobs report a little bit disappointing, but added, I expect it's going to revise up. Hassett's comments on CNBC's Squawk on the Street came shortly after the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that non-farm payrolls rose by only 22,000 in August. So, Hassett's comments on Squawk Box, he basically says that is less than 1/3 of the 75,000 new jobs expected by economists who were surveyed by the Dow Jones ahead of the report. When Hassett was asked if he was concerned about sluggish hiring rate, he responded with a personal anecdote. Members of my family have been hired, he said. Both of them started their new jobs about a week ago. And so you are seeing that people are being hired. Hassett later Friday told Fox News that the BLS has been struggling with bad response rates to surveys about jobs. He also pointed to a Goldman Sachs study on Thursday, which he said shows that August seasonal jobs reports for a decade or more have had to be revised upward by 70,000 or so jobs. So he's kind of saying that based on historical trends, that normally the August job report gets revised upward. So I don't know. It might be a little bit of wishful thinking there. Hopefully so. I don't know that it really matters all that much at the end of the day, because the bigger thing is, what is the Fed ultimately going to do with interest rates? And I think this report shows, again, 4 months of weakening labor market data, which points to they're probably going to reduce the rates in September. So all right, let's go in here. So now let's talk about this for a second here. So nearly 1 million jobs are about to vanish from the books. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics is scheduled to revise its job growth figures from early 2024 through early 2025 next week. Forecasters expect job growth to have been slower than previously thought. The adjustment is part of a routine process that has become controversial in recent months after President Donald Trump accused the head of the BLS of rigging the data. Why would it be, again, why is it controversial now? When they released this report last year, they revised it down by 818,000 jobs last year. Never existed. Now it comes out here, and let's see what they say here. Forecasters expect the Bureau of Labor Statistics to revise its job growth estimates downward for April 2024 through March of 2025 next Tuesday as part of a routine annual benchmark process. Economies expect the revisions to reflect anywhere from 475,000 to 900,000 fewer jobs than the 1.76 million initially estimated. That is literally over half of the jobs that were initially estimated. So, the Bureau routinely revises its labor market statistics to include data such as employer surveys or unemployment insurance claims that aren't available when monthly reports are prepared. Those statistical adjustments usually come and go without fanfare, but that wasn't the case last month. No, these statistical reports usually come and go without fanfare because you don't see almost 1 million jobs disappearing that weren't there to begin with. That's why they usually come and go with no fanfare. But last year, like I said, 818,000 jobs last year, and now we're going to, and I saw, I think Goldman Sachs thinks the number is going to be like 950. So you take 800,000, 900, that's 1.7 million jobs that never existed, that they said were created, that never existed. So again, when you go back to this job, when you go back to this and you're looking at this and you go back to January of 24 and you're looking at like, oh yeah, so think about this. So January 24, 256,000 jobs, February, 236,000 jobs, 310,000 jobs in March, April, 108,000, 216,000, 118,000. So in other words, what I'm saying here is when you look at all these numbers here, from March of 24 all the way to March of 25, and you start looking at this and you readjust these rates accordingly, all of a sudden the labor market's going to look pretty bad for 2024. And again, and you have to ask yourself, well, why was this done? Oh, something happened last year. What happened last year? Oh, that's right. There was this major presidential election and Joe Biden was trying to get reelected. Well, if the labor market's in the toilet, it's kind of hard for Joe Biden to get reelected, isn't it? So they prop up all these numbers, and now when Trump is in there, and now they want to drop this bomb, and now they want to spin the news and basically say, oh, well, this is all Trump's fault because he fired the head of BLS and he's got his people in there and they're manipulating numbers and stuff. No, stop. This was the damage that was already done. This was the damage that was already done by the previous head of the BLS and the people that she had working for her over there. So now, but like that's what I mean. Hopefully we get this revision in there, and hopefully throughout the rest of the year now, we hopefully start to get the real numbers, better numbers, and not this manipulated nonsense. And again, I would like to see all of these numbers revised so that we could have a real picture of what the labor market really looks like. That's what I would like to see. Let's see these revised numbers. Let's see these revised charts, and then we can get a better idea of what we're looking at here. So like I said, this is going to be coming out here very shortly. And like I said, and people should be alarmed by this. They really should be alarmed by this. So, and we'll see. So let's see here. Let's look at a couple other things here. And again, I want to show you guys a couple of articles here because I'm going to point out to you the little bit of duplicity and the trickery here, if you will, for some of this stuff. So let's look at this first article here. So labor market lost steam as tariffs and interest rates stifle job creation. Interesting. Haven't complained about interest rates yet, have they? But now they're starting to complain about interest rates, right? When Trump calls for interest rates to be cut, Trump is, he's out in left field. He doesn't know what he's talking about, right? But apparently here they're stifling the job creation, okay? And then jobs lose steam based on tariffs. Do we have any information? Do we have anything yet that suggests that tariffs are a main issue here with the loss of jobs? No, we do not. We have no evidence. We have zero evidence of that so far. But yet that's the headline that they seek to lead with here. So U.S. employment had 7.2 million job openings in July. The most recent data in the job openings and labor turnover survey, that's down from 7.4 million in June and the lowest since September of 2024. Tariffs and high interest rates have stifled job creation, although employers have avoided mass layoffs so far. The report on job openings added detail to a government report from July showing the hiring market had slowed down significantly in recent months. So, yeah, so that's the one hand. Now let's go to the other one. Fed cut now appears certain after weak jobs report. So the Federal Reserve is now nearly certain to cut its benchmark interest rate in September by at least 25 basis points and possibly 50. I seriously doubt we're going to get 50 basis point cut. A report on the jobs market released Friday showed hiring is slower than expected, giving the Fed reason to boost the job market with lower interest rates. Fed officials have been torn between keeping rates high to fight inflation and lowering them to prevent unemployment from rising. No, they haven't been torn. They haven't been torn at all. They've been pretty set in the fact that they are basically not lowering interest rates. For now, the Fed may focus more on the threat to the job market rather than the possibility that tariffs will stoke inflation. So now we have that they're calling for basically a potential certainty and a job interest rate cut. But let's just go back and just take a look at these articles here for a second here. So they're reporting here on the one hand that nearly 1 million jobs are about to vanish. And that's because of misreputation and bad reporting from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. But at the same point, the labor market is losing steam because of tariffs and interest rates. Really? Because I thought it was losing steam because of bad numbers from bad bureaucrats over there at the Labor Bureau Statistics giving us basically a bunch of crap numbers. And then finally, they're coming in here now, and then the Fed has been torn between cutting and keeping rates high. No, they haven't. Jeremy Powell has been very clear that he's doing what he's doing for political reasons to stick it to Trump. The U.S. economy be darned, and that's what he's going to do. So there's no this conflict or he's torn or whatever. But now I just think that with the labor market where it's at, with the fact that the inflation has not, all this supposed tariff inflation has not shown up, I don't think he has much reason left to sit there and not cut interest rates. I think we could pretty much lock in a 25 basis point rate cut at the September meeting. I know some people have thrown out there, well, maybe they do 50. I don't see 50 happening. I just don't see that. I don't think Jeremy Powell can force himself to make a cut that aggressive, even though he did it for Biden in September of last year. He did it for Biden a year ago, but he's not going to do it. Okay, now Waller here, who's still in the running to be Jeremy Powell's replacement, he basically said that basically the Fed should start cutting this month and it can adjust the pace. So the Federal Reserve Governor Chris Waller, a candidate to take over from Jeremy Powell as chair in 2026, on Wednesday voiced his support for starting a rate-cutting cycle in 2 weeks and said the central bank has the flexibility to adjust that pace in the future. When the labor market turns bad, it turns bad fast. So for me, I think we need to start cutting rates at the next meeting, Waller said in an interview on Squawk Box. We don't have to go into the lock sequence of steps. We can kind of see where things are going because people are still worried about tariff inflation. I'm not, but everybody else is. Waller believes there should be multiple cuts over the next few months, saying interest rates today are perhaps 1 to 1.5 percentage points above their neutral level. I would say over the next 3 or 6 months, we could see multiple cuts coming in, whether it's like every meeting. We'll have to wait and see what that data says, Waller said. So again, and this is exactly what I have been saying for the last 3 or 4 months. We are a point to a point and a half above where we should be. And again, I know President Trump has come out and he said he wants to see 200, 300 basis point rate cuts. We don't want to do that. We don't want to do that for a number of reasons. Number one is we do not want to go back to zero interest rate policy, ZIRP. We don't want to go back to that. We don't want to go back to these zero interest rates. That's not healthy for the economy. It's not smart, and that would be a bad thing. Number two is if you cut the rates by a point or a point and a half, that takes the federal funds rates down to about 3%, okay? If a recession does hit and you do need to decrease rates further, if you take rates all the way down 300 basis points and you're back to zero, where do you cut from there? You've got nowhere to cut. You got nowhere to go. So you're stuck. You certainly don't want to go negative. Because we saw Japan did that, Europe did that. We saw how that worked out for them. It wasn't too good. So you don't want to do that. You don't want to cut. You don't want to cut to the bone in that fashion. So there's a couple reasons for that. But I think 1% to 1.5%. I think that's the sweet spot. If you could get rates on 30-year, if you can get the 30-year mortgage rate back down to 5.25, 5.5 from where it's at now, we're hovering around 6.6%. You can get back to there all of a sudden. And I'm not saying that's a silver bullet or it's a magic cure-all for housing affordability. It's not. But that is going to dramatically help, I think. And I think that will really get some of the things in the economy humming again. Because, again, the real estate market's not just residential real estate. There's also a lot of commercial real estate in there. There's a lot of commercial real estate in there that needs to be refinanced. There's a lot of people that would like to start buying more investment properties again that have been sitting on the sidelines waiting for the Fed to reduce rates. So there's a certain amount of pent up demand that's out there right now, I believe, that will hopefully come out. But we'll see. But I think Waller is pretty spot on here. And again, I think what the Fed is, I think what you're looking at right now is a rate cut in September, maybe another pause in October, and then maybe another rate cut in November, December. And, basically bringing us down about 50 basis points through the end of the year, and then possibly doing a few more rate cuts. But yeah, I would be totally fine if they basically said, hey, we're going to do 25 basis point rate cuts and we're going to do one every meeting. Like I said, I think they should do 75 basis points through the rest of the year, and then maybe take a pause in January and see, just see where things are at, and basically say, okay, we did 75 basis points. Let's take a breather for a month or two, see what happens, and then maybe come back with another 50 or 75 basis point rate cuts, over, say, maybe in like March, April, May next year. That's what I think they should do. But what do I know, right? I'm just some crazy YouTuber, right? Some crazy banking YouTuber, my side gig, my side hustle. All right. So what has this all done for gold? Well, gold hits all-time high amid rate cut expectations. So silver also prices breached the $40 per ounce level for the first time since 2011. So gold prices hit an all-time high on September 2nd amid expectations of an interest rate cut and growing uncertainty related to tariffs. Spot gold hit a new high of $3,508 per ounce in early trading on September 2nd, breaking the previous high of roughly 3,500 set on April 22nd. The precious metal was trading at 3,484. As for silver, spot prices broke through the $40 per ounce level on September 1st for the first time in 14 years to hit $41.24, the highest level since September of 2011. On September 2nd, spot prices were trading at around $40.50. So, yeah, gold and silver are really shooting up. Again, one of the things I say to people, one of the things you have to consider about gold, why do central bankers hate the price of gold? And why do they never talk about it? Why do they never talk about it? Because the price of gold is a reflection of how good of a job central bankers are actually doing. If people thought that the Federal Reserve was doing a bang up job, that everything was hunky dory, the price of gold would not be $3,500 an ounce. The price of gold would be much lower. And so, but people don't think the Fed is doing a good job. People think the Fed is doing a lousy job. And that is what it's primarily driving the price of gold up. And you just have to keep that kind of psychology in mind as you consider the gold price. So if you think the Fed is gonna turn a corner here and really start doing an amazing job, and then maybe you might want to dump some of that because you might think that the gold price might come back down here over the next 6 to 12 months. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the Fed is going to continue to make bumble after bumble, and so gold price in my mind will probably continue to go up. So, all right. Now, before we jump in, I got a bunch of tariff news here, but before we jump into the tariff news, I want to take a step out for just a second. So this is the point in the program where I like to go over the 5 episodes that I put out this week. I like to give you guys the economic indicators coming up for this week, and I like to give you guys some banking news. So let's go to what were the 5 episodes that I put out this week? Well, Monday was Labor Day, and I actually decided to do a Labor Day special for 2025, and this was a review. It was a book review, but it was mainly a review of Chapter 2 in the book called Money GPT, which was written by James Rickards. Love James Rickards, love a lot of his books. So this episode is a review of the book Money GPT, which is also subtitled AI and the Threat to the Global Economy, written by James Rickards. This book explores the impact of AI on global financial markets, highlighting its potential to both enhance efficiency and trigger catastrophic economic disruptions due to its lack of human judgment. This review mainly focuses on Chapter 2 in the book, which is titled Banking Mythos. This chapter is about a hypothetical bank run caused by AI. So this book is recommended for bankers, financial professionals, politicians, and students. So, but I hope people enjoyed that Labor Day special. I hope that people enjoyed the kind of focus on this, kind of like a hypothetical bank run. And what I think was really interesting is that, James looks at a lot of the evidence we already have. He in particular, he really takes a hard look at Silicon Valley Bank and their failure in 2023 to justify a lot of what, his hypothetical comments around a potential bank run in the future. And, based on, what AI would have been trained on, what AI would have seen as far as financial data, financial analysis, understanding how the government and regulators have reacted to bank failures in years past. So again, I thought it was a really interesting story from Chapter 2 of this book. I think the book is great. I keep tell people, if you want to have some bad dreams and be kept up at night, read Chapter 4 in the book, which is all about what could potentially go wrong, like nuclear war because of AI. Like, yeah, you want to be kept up at night, read that chapter in this book. But I hope everybody will go out and check out Money GPT, because it's a really good book. Okay. And then I got back to kind of the typical flair for the rest of the week. So on Tuesday, I did episode 459, which was a review of the FDIC quarterly banking profile for the second quarter of 2025. And overall results for the banking industry included net income decreased, net interest margin remained relatively unchanged, loan growth accelerated, domestic deposits increased, and asset quality metrics remained generally favorable. The deposit insurance fund reserve ratio increased 5 basis points and now exceeds the statutory minimum. So again, those are just kind of the highlights of the report, but I hope you go on and check the report out, or check out that episode when you have a second. And then on Wednesday, I did episode 460, which was Customers Bank Lessons Learned from the Changing Crypto Regulatory Environment. So this episode examined an article from Banking Dive titled Customer CEO Talks Lessons Learned from Fed Enforcement Action. So approximately 1 year ago, the Philadelphia Federal Reserve Bank hit Customers Bank with an enforcement action related to its digital assets. With the changes in presidential administration, regulatory attitude toward digital assets, new regulations around stablecoins, and improvements at Customers Bank, the CEO goes over lessons learned from this experience. Again, I thought this was a really interesting article. After the failure of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank, and because of the regulatory reaction, pretty much every bank in the country was afraid to really dip their toes into crypto. A lot of them just don't understand crypto, but a lot of them don't want to understand crypto. And a lot of them are just, they view crypto very skeptically. And on top of it all, the regulators basically came back and said, don't do this. Don't do this. If you get into this, we're going to hammer you. Customers, on the other hand, they saw a real opportunity, and they basically said, nope, with Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank out of the way, we want to go full bore into this. And we want to become kind of the go-to digital asset cryptocurrency bank in the country. And so they dove into it. And sure enough, the Philadelphia Federal Reserve slapped them with an enforcement action and basically said, yeah, you guys, we don't like the way you guys are handling this whole digital assets and everything else that's going on with this. So, we're going to come down with you guys. And I know some banks around the country undoubtedly were kind of looking at, I'm sure there was a little, in the background, there was a little, I told you so. I told you so. I knew it. I knew this was going to happen to them. But there's a big but here, with everything that's happened, with the change in administration, the change in tone toward digital assets, a lot of the new regulation, the Genius Act that just got put through, and some of the other stuff that's going to be considered very shortly here in the Senate. All of a sudden now, customers may not be looking so foolish in this, and customers themselves really beefed up with a lot of new employees, really tried to refine a lot of their processes and things like that. So, I think they're positioning themselves for a good point. Now, hasn't said whether or not that enforcement action was released or not. But again, I think this is just a good, almost like a case study. It's a good example for a lot of banks to look at right now, especially I think if you're thinking about getting into the digital asset space. I think Customers is definitely a bank that you want to look at, and you want to just kind of keep an eye on what's going on over there. So, okay. Then on Thursday, I put out episode 461, which is an update on realtor fees and the landmark legal settlement. So this episode examined 2 articles, one from the Business Journals, which was titled Real Estate Commissions Are Taking a Surprising Turn After Landmark Settlement, and one from the Wall Street Journal titled Why a Landmark Settlement on Realtor Fees Hasn't Cut Costs. So after the landmark real estate industry settlement, it was anticipated that major changes would be coming for real estate buyers and realtors' commissions. Real estate commissions have remained actually pretty steady, but agents have reported working harder for the same income. So for anybody who doesn't know, there was this major lawsuit against basically NAR, National Association of Realtors. They lost the lawsuit, and a lot of changes were coming. And basically what it amounted to was how commissions are paid between buyers and sellers on residential real estate transactions. Now, this really had no bearing on the commercial world, because in the commercial world, the seller was always responsible for their representative and the buyer was always responsible for their representative. That's it. You pay whoever you're working with. In residential real estate, it's never worked like that. It's always been the seller that was responsible for paying the full commission for both their agent and the buyer's agent. And I think in this market where a lot of houses were being sold in less than 24 hours, and prices were going up, so the commissions were going up, and people are sitting there. So you sell a $500,000-$600,000 house, and all of a sudden you're paying a $50,000-$60,000 real estate commission. I think, and you're sitting there going, wait a minute, my realtor just put this thing online for 5 minutes. I got 50 people came in, looked at the house, and it got sold within 24 hours. I had an agreement of sale on my desk that I signed off on and agreed to. So what work did they really do? I mean, what did this buyer's agent really do? What did my agent really do, for that matter? And and yet I'm going to pay them I'm going to pay them $50,000-$60,000 of my money, that my hard-earned money over the years. I worked very hard to build up the equity in this house to now sell it, to go retire or downsize, whatever you're doing, maybe get another house, whatever you're doing. But again, I think they were very legitimate questions and very legitimate concerns on the part of sellers to basically sit there and say, wait a minute, like, I think I'm kind of getting a raw deal here. So this settlement basically said that, you know what? Sellers are not responsible for paying the buyer's commission anymore. Now sellers, they can sell the house. Now, that's not necessarily what's happening as of yet. In some instances, the sellers are still paying the buyer's commission. I think it depends on where you're at and what the circumstances are of your particular transaction. But ultimately, though, this is, we're going to see over time this kind of shift. But a lot of people thought that the overall commissions were going to come down. And as of right now, what we're seeing is the commissions haven't really come down. They've stayed about the same. But particularly the buyer's agents, guess what? They're actually working a lot harder to make that $20,000-$30,000 commission again. It's not just, hey, show up and where's my check? So again, it's a very interesting times in the real estate business, particularly residential real estate. So I wanted to keep an eye on this, wanted to report on this, because I do think it's an important topic in the financial services world, so to speak. So, and then yesterday, Friday, I put out episode 462, which was called The Power of Swift. This episode examined an article from the Epoch Times titled The Power Behind the Photo, Why Swift, Not Sanctions, May Shape the Ukraine Endgame. Most people are not familiar with the SWIFT system, what it does, and how much power it wields in the flow of global finance. SWIFT, which stands for the Society of Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications, that's a mouthful, is based in Belgium. While SWIFT is mainly a messaging platform, it can also screen, freeze, and exclude financial transactions from any country in the world. If a country loses access to the SWIFT system, the financial consequences can be disastrous. So again, I kind of was waiting a while for an article like this because I wanted to use it to kind of explain, what happened with Russia, the Russia sanctions being cut off from the SWIFT system and how that affected them. Also, why this was the shot across the bow for the BRICS countries and why BRICS has ultimately decided to do what it did, and why the SWIFT system played such a key role in that, and why the SWIFT system is also playing a major role in what's going on right now with, Ukraine and some of the other countries in Europe over there. So again, so just to educate people a little bit on the SWIFT system, what it does, how it operates, and how much power it wields around, in global finance. So it's an amazingly powerful system. So again, hope people enjoy that episode. So okay, all right, let's see here. What economic indicators do we have coming up this week? So on Monday, September 8th, we have consumer credit. On Tuesday, September 9th, we get the 3-year Treasury note auction and the API weekly crude oil stock. On Wednesday, September 10th, we get the core PPI, regular PPI. We get the 10-year note auction. We get the Atlanta Fed GDP now for the third quarter. We get the federal budget balance. On Thursday, September 11th, we get continuing jobless claims, initial jobless claims, core CPI, and 30-year bond auction. And then finally, on Friday, September 12th, we get the Michigan consumer sentiment, the WSDE report, and the U.S. Baker Hughes total rate count. So a lot of inflation data, a lot of economic data coming out this week. So can't wait for all that stuff, right? I know you're all on pins and needles out there. All right, let's hit some banking news here, shall we? So what do we got? ICBA and other groups call on Congress to renew cybersecurity law. So ICBA and other groups call on Congress to extend the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act before its September 30th expiration date, saying the failure to do so would impede public-private sector coordination during cyber attacks and weaken the nation's cyber defenses. Yeah, I think that one's a little bit of a political hot button, so we'll see what happens with that. House panel passes ICBA-supported cybersecurity bill. So the House Homeland Security Committee unanimously passed the Widespread Information Management for the Welfare of Infrastructure and Government Act. ICBA supported the legislation that aims to modernize and extend the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act of 2015. Manufacturing activity contracted in August. Construction spending dipped in July. Philadelphia Fed updates confidence scam information. So the Philadelphia Federal Reserve Bank or the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia details types of confidence scams in the Fed's latest consumer compliance outlook. The article discusses ways to increase community bankers' awareness of the various types of confidence scams and provides resources for bank staff and customers dealing with the consequences of such scams. CFPB confirms plan to issue the new rule on the 1071. So the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau reiterated that the agency's new leadership has directed staff to initiate a new Section 1071 rule. In a status report filed with the Fifth Circuit in ICBA's lawsuit challenging the Section 1071 rule, the CFPB informed the court of its plans to initiate a new rulemaking process for Section 1071. The CFPB said it plans to issue a new proposed rule as expeditiously as reasonably possible. It confirmed it has extended compliance deadlines under the 2023 rule by approximately 1 year for all regulated entities. The earliest compliance date now applying to the largest volume lenders is set for July 1st of 2026. So we'll keep an eye on that one and see what the CFPB ultimately proposes there. ICBA honors National Community Bank Service Award recipients. So ICBA announced the winners of the 2025 National Community Bank Service Awards in recognition of the creation and exemplary efforts of the nation's community banks to help their local communities. As featured in the latest issue of Independence Banker magazine, Exceptional Community Bank Service Award Gulf Coast Bank and Abbeville, I think it's Louisiana, for its longstanding partnership with the Boys and Girls Club. What else here? Emerging Community Bank Service Award to Legends Bank in Clarksville, Tennessee. So congratulations there. Honorable mentions. The State Bank and Trust Company in Defiance, Ohio. Security State Bank of Oklahoma. And Key Community Bank in Inner Grove Heights, Minnesota. So, good to all those community banks for doing such a great job there. Cleveland Fed leader to host discussion this month. So the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland is slated to host a discussion with its president and CEO this month at noon. Monday, September 22nd, Cleveland Fed President and CEO Beth Hammack will host a discussion on the critical functions of reserve banks, the state of the economy, and ways reserve banks engage with the public. So that should be a very interesting one. Given the article that we talked about earlier from Mr. Bessent, that should be very interesting. Fed announces final individual capital requirements for large banks. So following its stress test earlier this year, the Federal Reserve announced that final individual capital requirements for large banks effective on October 1st. So large bank capital requirements are informed by the stress test results, which provide a risk-sensitive and forward-looking assessment of capital needs. In April, the Fed proposed a rule to average stress test results over 2 consecutive years to reduce year-over-year volatility from the stress test when calculating a firm's capital requirements. The OCC decreases assessment rates. So, okay. Philadelphia Fed updates check fraud warning. So the Philadelphia Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia details types of check fraud scams and risk mitigation techniques in the Fed's latest consumer compliance outlook. Latest credit union acquisition fueled by tax exemption. Following the latest acquisition of a community bank by a tax-exempt credit union, ICBA said the deal demonstrates why the growing skepticism of credit union tax and regulatory exemptions must evolve into policymaker actions. In a national news release following the deal, ICBA President and CEO Rebecca Romero Rainey cited growing media attention to credit unions abandoning their mission and continuing ICBA's call for policymakers to eliminate the federal tax exemption for credit unions over $1 billion in assets. Yes, I support that 110%, and hopefully something comes of that soon. And then we have the FDIC removes disparate impact references from the exam manual. I love it. The FDIC announced that it will evaluate potential discrimination under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act and Fair Housing Act only through evidence of disparate treatment. So again, exam manual updates. So the FBI said several sections of the Consumer Compliance Examination Manual have been updated to remove all references to disparate impact and how to evaluate disparate impact risk. So about disparate impact. So a bank may violate fair lending laws by creating a disparate impact when a neutral policy or practice results in disproportionate burdens on or illegally excludes a protected class. So the OCC in July announced that it removed references for disparate impact liability from the fair lending booklet of the Comptroller's Handbook, started removing references in other materials, and instructed examiners that they should no longer examine for disparate impact. Yes, that's good. That's real good. Okay, let me just check here to see if I have, what else do I have here? Kansas City Fed Bank earnings increased in the second quarter. Service sector index increases in August. Mortgage rates continued to drop. The 30-year fixed rate mortgage average dropped to 6.5% this week, which is good. Economic activity largely unchanged from the beige book. So economic activity changed a little from mid-July through early September. Mortgage applications decreased. And then let's see here. Personal income spending increased in July, and consumer sentiment drops in August. So there we go. So some banking news there for you. All right, let's get back to articles here. I've got another 20 minutes or so here with you guys. So let's try to, I got a lot of tariff news here. So I got to try to run through all this pretty quick. All right, so let's kick off with this. U.S. tariffs deliver record $30 billion in tariff revenue in August. Deficit outlook brightens. So Treasury Secretary Bessent forecasts annual tariff inflows tops $500 billion. So revenue from President Donald Trump's tariffs hit a fresh high of nearly $30 billion in August, with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent predicting even larger inflows ahead and forecasting that annual collections could top $500 billion and help bring down the deficit. Love it. Love it, love it, love it, love it. You love to see this. The latest daily statement showed $29.99 billion in tariff revenue as of August 25th, with a single-day haul of almost $22.5 billion on August 22nd. The best part, no consumer price inflation. Bessent wrote on X, noting that household goods prices have risen by just 0.7% annualized since April. The August surge follows back-to-back records earlier this summer, with July bringing in $28 billion and June $27 billion. Bessent told cabinet officials this week that revenues are now running far above expectations and could soon approach well over $500 billion, maybe towards the $1 trillion number, a stream he said is already making a meaningful dent in the budget deficit. He contrasted the current spending performance with that of the prior administration, saying that the average budget deficit under President Trump's term is 26% lower than during the last 12 months of President Joe Biden's time in the White House. So again, this is beautiful. You love to see this tariff revenue. And it's just so crazy that you do not see this on any of the major news networks. Like, you don't see Bloomberg talking about this. You don't see CNBC talking about this. You don't see Fox Business talking about this. Nobody is talking about this. They all want to beat him up, Trump that is, for the imaginary, tariff inflation. There's, all this tariff inflation is going to come and wreck our economy. They all want to talk about that. All they want to talk about is the potential ramifications. They don't want to talk about the actual, like there's an income, there's a cost side to this and there's an income side to it. And look at what the income side is doing. They all they ever want to talk about is what may happen over here on the cost side. They never want to talk about what's going on the income side. So hopefully hopefully this is one of those gems that I'm giving people that they're not seeing out there in the regular, business news media. That's what I'm hoping for. That's what I'm hoping that this podcast is doing for people. I'm hoping that I'm talking about things like this that you're not seeing in other places. So again, the tariff revenue is fantastic so far. Now, conversely, the U.S. trade deficit soars as capital goods imports hit record high. So record capital goods inflows and higher industrial supplies overshadow weak exports, with data suggesting a lift for manufacturing despite the wider trade gap. So the U.S. trade deficit widened sharply in July, climbing by more than 30% as imports of capital goods surged to record levels, signaling resilient domestic demand and firmer business investment. The overall gap in goods and services rose by 32.5% to $78 billion, the Commerce Department reported on September 4th. Imports increased by 5.9% to $358 billion, while exports edged up just 0.3% to $280 billion, leaving the goods deficit 21% higher than in June at $103.9 billion. Cutting trade deficits has been a central goal of President Donald Trump's policy agenda, alongside a push to reindustrialize the U.S. economy. While the July trade deficit figures undercut the first objective, the details suggest a lift for manufacturing. Capital goods imports climbed by $4.7 billion to a record $96.2 billion, driven by inflows of computers, telecom gear, and industrial machinery. Industrial supplies and materials rose by $12.5 billion, including a $9.7 billion increase in non-monetary gold. Economist notes these categories are closely tied to business investment, as they represent tools, equipment, and raw materials used to expand production capacity. The higher import number reflects increased business demand for capital investment. CapEx expenditures are projected to increase significantly this year as far as investments in both infrastructure and technology. Dan Veroni, president and CEO of Potomac Core, a consulting firm specializing in trade matters, told Epoch Times in an emailed statement. President Trump's new big, beautiful law, for example, is designed to get businesses to invest on the front end. The 100% expensing provision is a boon for manufacturers. It is an accelerant for small businesses in the manufacturing arena, and we can expect to see strong investment in this sector. So in multiple studies, capital goods imports have been identified as an important source or growth of the U.S. economy, and reductions in imports of both capital goods and industrial supplies have been tied to negative effects on both output and employment. Some research also suggests that headline trade deficits don't tell the full story. As economists at the Dallas Fed said in a recent note, trade deficits can reflect strong investment and facilitate higher investment than might otherwise occur, or mitigate the costs to the private sector of fiscal expansion. So in other words, while we are seeing this increase in the U.S. trade deficit, a lot of this is going to capital expenditure, which is going to lead to further growth in the future. Like, in other words, somebody is buying a machine that they're going to use to increase capacity, increase production at their plant. This is the kind of things that we want to see. So again, while we may not be happy with the U.S. trade deficit going up, it's going up right now for a very good reason, and it's going up in a way that's going to drive a lot of future growth. So again, okay with that for the moment. Okay, Trump will ask the Supreme Court for expedited ruling on his tariffs appeal. So last week, one of the courts came, I forget, with Circuit Court, whatever, but the Fifth Circuit, whatever the court was, but they came in and basically said that, Donald Trump's tariffs are illegal, which is complete BS, and it's going to go to the Supreme Court. It's going to get thrown out. But they can have their fun for the moment, okay? But Trump basically asked the Supreme Court for an expedited ruling on a tariffs appeal. So President Donald Trump said he will ask the Supreme Court for an expedited ruling to overturn an appeals court decision that found most of his tariffs are illegal. If you take away tariffs, we could end up being a third world country, Trump told reporters at the White House. So yes, I agree with this, and I hope the Supreme Court will look at this and provide an expedited ruling, which it's going to go in the president is allowed to issue tariffs. Okay, he is. All right. I mean, it's ridiculous that they even put forth this to try to block this. I mean, it's just mind-numbingly irresponsible on the part of these judges. But anyway, I digress. So, despite the ruling, the U.S. is still negotiating trade deals. Our trading partners, they continue to work very closely with us on negotiations, U.S. Trade Representative Jamison Greer said. So the Trump administration is still engaging in negotiations with trading partners, despite an appeals court ruling that determined most of the president's tariffs are illegal. U.S. Trade Representative Jamison Greer said on August 31st, doing an interview with Fox News, Fox Defense Program, Greer confirmed that the administration will appeal the ruling. So this is not over. All the tariffs are still in effect, he said. Our trading partners, they continue to work very closely with us on negotiations. People are moving forward with their deals regardless of what this court may say in the interim. While Greer did not say specifically which trading partners the United States is still in negotiations with, he mentioned speaking with one trade minister the previous morning. So then it says out here, on August 29th, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit ruled 7-4 that President Donald Trump's reciprocal tariffs on U.S. trading partners are mostly illegal. The ruling upheld one handed down by the Court of International Trade earlier this year, which had said Trump incorrectly used his emergency powers to impose the tariffs. Again, I think when this gets to the Supreme Court, it all gets thrown out. And that's why a lot of the trading partners are still negotiating, because they know this is all BS and it's all going to get tossed out eventually here. So, but that being said, if things should not go in Trump's favor, the White House is basically saying that they do have a backup strategy. So if Trump's tariffs are overturned, so Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is preparing a legal brief for the U.S. Solicitor General. So Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has said the White House has plenty of tools at its disposal to implement President Trump's global tariffs if the Supreme Court does not uphold his use of the 1977 Emergency Powers Law. The U.S. Court of Appeals, like we said, that the IEEP grants the president broad authority over international economic transactions, including regulating imports and exports, freezing foreign assets, or halting financial transactions after declaring a national emergency. In a Labor Day interview with Reuters, Bessent stated that while he is confident the High Court will uphold the president's reciprocal tariff agenda, the administration has various options available. He's referring to Section 388 of the Tariff Act of 1930, also known as the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. It contains a trade provision that authorizes the president to impose new tariffs or additional duties of up to 50% on foreign products entering the United States for a period of 5 months if they are determined to threaten domestic commerce. Bessent said he is planning a legal brief for the U.S. Solicitor General to highlight the urgency of stopping the flow of fentanyl into the country, pointing to approximately 70,000 fentanyl-linked deaths per year in the United States. He questioned how that could not be considered an emergency. So, all right, we will continue to keep an eye on that. Tariffs helped save America's credit rating. No, you're kidding, right? It's amazing. Tariffs are going up and international taxes are coming down in the internal taxes are coming down in the United States. That makes sense to S&P, which held the U.S. credit rating at AA+ / A-1+ with a stable outlook for the coming years. Tariffs, a stable economy, and credible and effective monetary policy were clinchers that undergird the strong U.S. rating. So again, tariffs come to save the day. We heard with tariffs were bad, though, right? But they saved the day, at least as far as S&P and our credit rating. Trump signs order implementing his trade deal with Japan. So the deal reduces tariffs on Japanese cars from 27.5% to 15%. So basically, Donald Trump signed an executive order on September 4th to impose new 15% tariffs on Japanese goods and enact other provisions of a previous trade agreement with Tokyo, which includes $550 billion in investment commitments in the United States. Hopefully, it just doesn't end up like Hyundai. Yes, that's a dig, and I'm going to continue dropping those bombs. Okay, Trump says India offered zero tariffs after decades of one-sided trade. So Trump has criticized India's reliance on Russian energy and defense imports, noting that the U.S. has sold very little to the South Asian nation. So Trump not happy with India. And then Trump also calls India-U.S. trade relationship a totally one-sided disaster after Modi visits China. So U.S. President Donald Trump on Monday called trade ties with India a totally one-sided disaster. India have now offered to cut their tariffs to nothing but it's getting late. They should have done so years ago, Trump said on Truth Social. This comes against the backdrop of the U.S. imposing 50% tariffs on the country, including secondary duties of 25% last month for purchasing Russian oil. Here's a couple of ideas to the president. The idea of cutting the call centers, tariffing the call centers, if you will, over in India. I think that is a wonderful idea. I think they should do that. I think he should do that right now. Another thing would be, how about we end that lovely H-1B visa program? I think that would be another fantastic step. Let's get rid of the call centers. Let's get rid of the H-1B visa program. I think doing those two things alone would be enough to get India's attention and bring them back to the table, as it were. So that would be my recommendations there on that. Trump signs order on tariff reductions for aligned partners on certain products. The changes will take effect on September 8th, according to a White House fact sheet. So President Donald Trump signed an executive order on September 5th modifying the scope of reciprocal tariffs, including possible adjustments to tariffs on certain items for aligned partners that reach reciprocal trade and security deals with the United States. The changes will take effect on September 8th, according to the fact sheet. The order excludes certain items from the reciprocal tariffs announced in April. Trump stated that the move was necessary to protect America's economic and national security, according to the White House fact sheet. So again, I'm probably sure some more information to come on that one. Trump threatens trade probe to nullify EU fines against Apple and Google. So the European Union must stop this practice against American companies immediately, the U.S. president said on Truth Social. Yes, I agree with the president on this. Again, not that I'm defending Apple or Google or whatever, but you know, the EU just runs around thinking that it can fine whatever companies it wants. And here's the bigger problem. If they get away with this and we allow them to get away with this, okay, they will then begin to censor Apple and Google, which will, wait for it, it will lead to censorship here in America, because they will basically tell Apple and Google, we will continue to fine you and maybe even fine you to the point of serious problems, okay, if you don't comply with this. So censorship there can lead to censorship here. So that's why we cannot allow this to stand. Like this had the EU, basically we have to nip this one in the bud and stop EU from these abusive policies of just fining American companies because they don't like the fact that we have freedom of speech over here. Okay, experts warn U.S. of CCP duplicity as trade talks continue. You've got no. I have been told that those Chinese fellows are honorable people and that they are upstanding and truthful and that they are good dealers and are just, honorable people. I'm just shocked. You just call me shocked by this. How are you going to expect a regime that's conducting the largest scale religious persecution to pave its own way to democracy? A China expert says. So yes, as shockingly as this may sound, you can't trust the CCP. And they have proven time and time again that, when they conduct trade negotiations, there's always this level of duplicity. They never come through on the things that they promise. They always promise that they're going to do this or that, and they always shaft us in the back at the end of the day. So I think the time is coming. I think we need a hardcore decoupling from China. A lot of people, I think, would push back on that notion. A lot of people would say, well, that's just crazy because of how much stuff that we buy from China. But I just think it needs to be done. I think it needs to be done. I think we've gotten so far in bed with China that has led us to these problems that we have today. We have built China into this major enemy. We did that. We built them into this. They didn't do that. We built them. We gave them all the capital. We gave them all the money. We gave them all the business to build them into what they are today. We did that. And we need to cut them off from that. And again, I will be doing a special in the coming weeks. I'm going to be doing a whole special on China. So keep an eye out for that one. Okay, some other things here. So U.S. government revokes TSMC's waiver to ship semiconductor equipment to China. The move by the Commerce Department shuts down a Biden-era export program curbing licensing-free shipments of advanced chip gear to China. So again, that's good. I like to see it. U.S. government makes it harder for Samsung, HK Hynix to make chips in China. The Commerce Department gave the companies 120 days to obtain the licenses to continue supplying their China-based plants. So the federal government is making the process of building semiconductors in China for chip makers such as Samsung and SK Hynix more difficult by rescinding authorizations that allowed the companies to receive U.S. semiconductor manufacturing equipment there, according to a recent filing from the Federal Register. Again, love to see it. I love it. Let's make it a lot harder for them to make those chips. And okay, in these next two articles, I wanted to show everybody as an example that contrary to, again, the business media, a lot of other countries around the world have trade disputes. And so shockingly, everybody uses tariffs. Here's a couple of examples. China hits EU pork with up to 65% tariff, escalating trade dispute. Really? Because I was told that, everybody's just got, free trade, that, the only people that the only person who's throwing these tariffs on people is Trump. No, that's not true. Every country around the world uses tariffs because they know how effective tariffs are. And here's a perfect example of China hitting the EU with pork with up to 62% tariff, escalating a potential trade dispute. Let's look at another one. Mexico considers placing tariffs on China. President Steinbaum says officials at Washington and Ottawa have voiced concerns that Mexico serves as a backdoor for Chinese products. So again, Mexico thinking about hitting China with some tariffs. So again, just to show some examples of, we're not the only country in the world with trade disputes. We're not the only country in the world hitting other countries with tariffs. This happens every day in every country in the world. So, okay, again, contrary to what is out there in the press. So, okay. Let's take a few more minutes here. I want to hit just some of these other articles I have here to try to wrap up the night here. So just, hang tight for a few more minutes. Let's hit, because again, okay, that was all the tariff news. So let's hit some further banking and economic news here. So industrial space posts the first negative demand in 15 years as commercial real estate cools. Tariffs, high interest rates, and fresh supply combined to push industrial demand into the red. So the U.S. industrial property market registered its first quarterly drop in demand since 2010, underscoring mounting pressure across the broader commercial real estate market as high borrowing costs and economic uncertainty weigh on tenants and investors. In the second quarter, occupiers gave back 11.3 million square feet of industrial space, a core subset of commercial real estate that includes warehouses, logistical facilities, and manufacturing sites, according to an August report. So the decline was likely driven by the increasing macroeconomic uncertainty caused by unclear tariff policies and persistently high interest rates. I would say that hey, don't panic. If interest rates begin to come down, this will fix itself. But it's interesting to note. It's good to take note of that there is a little bit of, there's a little bit of turmoil in industrial space. Okay, let's look at another. Okay, big ruling this week on Google. So this judge had Google dead to rights, finally recognized Google as the monopoly as it is. And for weeks, we have been waiting for this big ruling. And everybody's been in anticipation. How is Google going to finally get broken up? We're finally going to get the big behemoth is finally going to get its comeuppance. And no. We didn't get any of that. This judge, I don't know what happened, but this judge backed off all of that. And it basically says here, Google ruling shows antitrust tools struggle to keep up with tech markets. The marketplace moves faster than the legal system, and judges are skittish about crafting industry rules. A judge ruled Google illegally maintained its search monopoly, but imposed light penalties. Like you got to be kidding me. I mean, I just can't believe it. And then here's federal judge orders Google to share data with search competitors. The judge in the high stakes antitrust case declined to order the company to sell its Chrome browser. Google will have to share data with its competitors. Oh, that's he really gave it to them. Again, it kills you, man, because, you're finally hoping that maybe, especially in the advertising space where Google has a totally monopoly on digital advertising with Google AdSense, you would think that this was finally the moment where something was going to happen here, and nothing. I don't know what, I don't know, I could say some things. I'm not. I think you guys all know where I'm thinking about this. I think, maybe I'm not even going to go there. I'm not going to go there. But again, it's just so disappointing. It's so disappointing, and it just kills you, man. Here's another one. Pump and dump worries prompt NASDAQ to tighten China listing rules. China-based companies will have to raise at least $25 million to go public. So NASDAQ wants to tighten rules for small Chinese stocks due to fraud and manipulation concerns. NASDAQ is seeking to tighten its rules for small Chinese stocks following criticism from Wall Street veterans and investor protection advocates that such listings have become a hotbed for fraud and manipulation. Newsflash for the regulators and people on Wall Street. Yeah, China is going to try to take advantage of you in any way that they can. Okay, this is all warfare to China. It's economic warfare, and they are happy to pump and dump companies all day long on the stock exchanges. They don't care how many American investors lose their shirt. So yeah, I think all the Chinese companies should just be kicked off of the stock exchanges. They don't abide by any type of accounting rules whatsoever. None. Zero. They don't share data with us. They don't tell us what's really going on. Where, basically you invest in a Chinese company, you're flying blind. You have no idea what that company is really doing. So, and because of that, I think all the Chinese companies should just kick off the exchanges altogether. I've been saying that for years. So anyway, okay, let's take a look. So as banks quit UN climate alliance, critics say too soon to declare victory. It's encouraging to see these alliances unravel, but I wouldn't call it a victory, Utah Treasurer Marler Oaks says. So yeah, so what we have here is a lot of banks are, leaving this group, but this one guy basically says here that, like, hey, look, I wouldn't call this a victory. The underlying agenda hasn't gone away. It's simply being repackaged. Still, this is a clear sign that public scrutiny works and that the pressure campaign against lawful industries cannot withstand legal, political, and market accountability. And he goes on to basically say that, yeah, that like these banks that all pulled out of this, they're not this. Their agenda hasn't changed. They're just worried about getting sued. They're worried about the appearance, about public sentiment, because it's turned against all this climate crap. And so they're pulling out of it. But again, do not make the mistake of thinking that this is total victory. This is called, we're going to try to repackage, call it something, change the name, call it something else, bring it back as something different, but is the same thing. So again, good step, but not the end of the world. Okay. Central Florida de novo targets early 2026 opening. So the group behind prospective lender Portrait Bank has submitted regulatory applications and increased its capital target based on strong response, said Eric Weiner, who will be CEO and president. So, love to see it. So a group led by Central Florida banking veterans seeks to establish a de novo in an Orlando suburb that will cater to local business needs. Love to see it. Wish them the best of luck with it. Again, love to see the de novo. I'd like to see a lot more de novo banks start to prop up. Would love to see that. Morgan Stanley wants the Fed to lower its stress capital buffer. The request comes a year after Goldman Sachs successfully petitioned the central bank to reduce its capital or its stress capital buffer. So the Federal Reserve on Friday laid out new individual capital requirements for large banks following its annual stress testing. The requirements take effect on October 1st. Morgan Stanley has asked the central bank to reduce its stress capital buffer requirement, a request the board is reviewing. So we'll see what happens with that. Celtic Bank fueled Ponzi scheme. Lawsuit alleges. So a group of investors is accusing the Utah-based lender of conspiring to defraud and racketeering in connection with what the Justice Department has labeled a $200 million water vending machine scheme. So Celtic Bank wreaked financial havoc by aiding a water vending machine Ponzi scheme that defrauded investors of millions of dollars, according to a complaint filed Wednesday in federal court. The civil lawsuit filed in U.S. District Court for the District of Utah accuses the Salt Lake City-based bank of fraud, aiding and abetting fraud, conspiracy to defraud, negligence, breach of fiduciary duty, and violating the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, among other charges. Also named in the complaint is former bank executive Scott Foster, who had been a senior vice president and head of small business administration lending at Celtic. The complaint alleges that $4.3 billion asset Celtic Bank, Celtic Investment, and Foster knowingly participated in the Ponzi scheme and took advantage of the SBA lending structure and taxpayer funds under 7A loan program and defrauded unsuspecting victims, including plaintiffs, of millions of dollars. So that is kind of a wild story, and I'll keep tabs on that and see how that one unfolds. JP Morgan Chase's small bites approach to growth is paying off. The largest U.S. lender is closely tracking customer migration as it maps out where to add more branches. Its Southeastern Consumer Banking lead Southeast Consumer Banking lead says. So JP Morgan, as I reported last week, probably looking for more growth in the South. Here's interesting. Elon Musk says about 80% of Tesla's value could eventually come from Optimus robots. As I have reported before, Elon Musk is beginning to pivot Tesla away from vehicles per se as their sole source of income, and he wants to go toward this Optimus robot. He is really betting the future on AI and robots. That's really, Tesla is really going to transform more into a robotics company in the years ahead. The question is, will this bet for Mr. Musk really pay off? And then finally, my last article here, I thought this was really interesting. Fake students plague California community colleges, displacing real enrollees. Colleges are deploying AI defenses to counter bot-driven fraud, according to college officials. So California's community college are grappling with a surge in fraudulent enrollments, with 1.2 million fake applicants last year, accounting for nearly 30% of new students, blocking real students from classes and costing millions in stolen financial aid, according to college officials. The problem, exacerbated by the shift to online learning during COVID-19 pandemic, affects at least 90 of the state's 116 campuses, says Marvin Martinez, chancellor of the Rancho Santiago Community College District, and Janine Kim, president of Santiago Canyon College. Before the pandemic, most classes were in person, making fraud more difficult, Martinez said. But with 80% of courses moving online, bots and fake students can enroll from anywhere, including other states or countries. Yes, the answer to that is bring people back in person. It's real simple. But again, fascinating story. Thought it was very interesting. So, all right. We made it, guys. We made it. Only 10 minutes overdue. Not too bad. All right. Well, I am going to wrap up as I always do. I've got our story of the week here, and then I've got our quote of the week. But before I get to that, I always like to just go over some tidbits here at the end. So I'm looking for reviews. So if you listen to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave me a review. That would really help the podcast. I would really appreciate it. Make sure to visit thebankernextdoor.com. A lot of great things on the website. Make sure to subscribe on the YouTube channel for the latest updates via posts. I put posts out. Usually I put posts every Sunday. I post all the episodes that are coming out for this upcoming week. I usually like to post just to let people know if there's any changes to the live stream time. I used to like people know I like to let people know usually about a day ahead of time what I'm going to be covering in the live stream on Saturday nights. So if you want the latest news and updates from the podcast, make sure to subscribe on YouTube so you get the posts. If you ever have questions or comments, you can send them to info@thebankernextdoor.com. So if you ever have questions for me, you want to suggest a topic, there's something you want me to cover, please send that information to me at info@thebankernextdoor.com. I would love to hear from you. Make sure to follow. I am up on Getter, True Social, and X. You can follow me on those platforms. May have some other platforms coming soon. We'll see. I'll let you know. Remember that the Banker Next Door is on YouTube, Rumble, and all major podcast platforms. We have episodes every week, Monday through Friday, premiering at noon. And the BND strategy room is always usually, like I said, try to get every Saturday night at 8 o'clock. So that's all my little reminders there for everybody. So, okay, let's go to our story of the week. So our story of the week here is the Federal Reserve System. So the Federal Reserve System, often called simply the Fed, is the central bank of the U.S. and one of the most powerful financial institutions in the world. It was founded to provide the country with a safe, flexible, and stable monetary and financial system. A central bank is a financial institution given privileged control over the production and distribution of money and credit for a nation or a group of nations. In modern economies, the central bank is usually responsible for the formulation of monetary policy and the regulation of member banks. The Fed is composed of 12 regional Federal Reserve banks that are each responsible for a specific geographic area of the U.S. The Fed was established in 1913 when President Woodrow Wilson signed the Owen Glass Federal Reserve Act in response to the financial panic of 1907. The Fed was created to support the health of the U.S. economy and ensure financial stability, and acts as the lender of last resort to member institutions that have no other place from which to borrow. It is also the main regulator of the country's financial institutions. Before the Fed, the country's banks operated in widely different ways, resulting in 4 major financial crises in less than half a century. The Federal Reserve Act requires the Federal Reserve banks to remit excess earnings to the U.S. Treasury after providing for operating expenses, payment of dividends, and the amount necessary to maintain surplus. Great question you might want to ask is who's receiving those dividends? Very interesting. We'll get into that at another time. One of the ways the Fed promotes economic growth and stability is by setting monetary policy and controlling the overall supply of money that is available to the nation's banks, its consumers, and its businesses. In addition to modifying interest rates, the Fed can buy or sell government bonds, regulate foreign exchange, forex rates, and revise the amount of cash that banks are required to maintain as reserves. The Federal Reserve Board is located in Washington, D.C. The main Federal Reserve Bank is located in New York. You also have Boston, Philadelphia, Cleveland, Richmond, Atlanta, which Atlanta has the GDP now and is kind of considered like the tech arm of the bank. You have Chicago. You have St. Louis. Now, St. Louis has one of my favorite things, the St. Louis Fred database is one of the main research centers of the Federal Reserve. You also have Minneapolis, Kansas City, Dallas, and San Francisco. And basically, in all of the Federal Reserve banks do some level of research, either in their area or on certain things around the overall economy. The Cleveland Fed does a lot of national economic reports. I love looking at some of like the annual small business report that gets put out by the Cleveland Federal Reserve, among other ones. So there is the Federal Reserve System. So, okay, what is our quote of the week? So our quote of the week is, nature has given men one tongue, but 2 ears, so that we may hear from others twice as much as we speak. And that was from Epictetus. Great quote from Epictetus there. So nature has given men one tongue, but 2 ears, so that we may hear from others twice as much as we speak. So, all right, everyone, that's all I got for tonight. I will tell everybody that, I'll close with this. So, just celebrated in August 2 years for the podcast. It was also the 1-year anniversary of this live stream. So, been doing the strategy room for a year now, but the podcast has been around for 2 years. And my main goal for this year, in year 3 of the podcast, is basically refinement. That is my mantra for the year, refinement. So I've kind of figured out what works. And now I really want to refine it. And that's going to mean a couple of tweaks here. Like, some of the ways that I title episodes might change a little bit. I might get away from the whole like episode 431 is such. It might just be a title for an episode. I'm going to try, do a lot, end cards, thumbnails, all the typical YouTube stuff that you need for hopefully making better videos. Hoping to start streaming on some additional platforms. Like, right now this just streams on YouTube. I'm hoping in the next month or so to start streaming on X and Rumble and maybe even 1 or 2 other places. So I'll keep everybody posted as a lot of those changes and hopefully improvements begin to happen here over the next 6 to 12 months. The ambiance of the strategy room here itself is going to change a little bit here in the next couple of weeks. And I'm hoping, because again, I've always wanted to give the strategy room a little bit more of its own character, as opposed to just the usual Banker Next Door episodes that get put out during the week. So, so again, keep an eye out for all those changes. I'm hoping to have a lot of good things coming this year. A lot of, like I said, upgrades, refinement. Refinement's the mantra of the year. Just again, just hoping to continue to make this better, a better channel, better experience, better information, better videos, the whole 9 yards. So again, I thank everyone for listening. I really appreciate it. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe, as that really helps the channel. If you like what you're seeing here, please make sure to spread the word, as that really helps. And with that being said, I wish everybody a great weekend. I thank everybody for hanging out with me a little bit here on a Saturday night. Have a wonderful time out there. Have a great week. Keep an eye out for my episodes coming out this week, and I will see everyone again real soon. Thanks.